Enhancing the developer and end-user experience on ChromeVox, TV Raman, Adu Bhandaru, Sergiu Toarca, Cagri Yildirim, August 7, 2012. Google Tech Talks are designed to disseminate a wide spectrum of views on topics including current affairs, science, medicine, engineering, business, humanities, law, entertainment, and the arts. Disclaimer: the views or opinions expressed by the guest speakers are solely their own and do not necessarily represent the views or opinions of Google Inc.
Thank you for coming, everyone. I'd like to set the context for this talk because you're going to hear three of our interns give you an overview of what they've been building this summer. But there is a bigger picture behind this. A common theme that you'll see running through these three projects is our work on ChromeVox. So I'll save them all some time by giving you a high-level overview of what the ChromeVox project is. So when you step back and think, right, the web and the cloud are Google's platform. But that's a very abstract statement. The web is not something that you can go touch and hold in your hands or run on a computer. The web platform becomes real when you take a concrete web runtime, such as Chrome. So Chrome is a fairly important platform to Google. We have Chrome OS, where you have Chrome as pretty much the only way of running things on a notebook or a desktop machine. So you have a thin layer of Linux with Chrome on top of it. And so roughly 3 years ago, we started this project called ChromeVox to build accessibility for Chrome OS. And what that does is it says if the web runtime, being Chrome, is a platform, and you can build all kinds of applications from word processors to chat applications to whatever else you need as a web app, then you should also be able to build accessibility tools as a web application. And that's really what ChromeVox is. So ChromeVox basically uses web APIs and calls out to text-to-speech via Chrome's native client layer to basically give you fluent spoken feedback as you work with all aspects of Chrome. So with that in mind, then, we have three summer projects to talk to you about. Serge, who will be going first, will be talking about the work he's done this summer in refactoring the ChromeVox codebase. And he's done some awesome work that actually helps the code health of this project. It's an exercise in taking running code, continuously refactoring it, and making sure that you still have the same effect while you have a cleaner code base. Following Serge will be Char, who worked on building what we call ChromeVox extensions. So a year ago, Google Docs actually started calling ChromeVox APIs to provide some enhanced user experiences. And what we realized was that exposing those APIs to all web developers would enable us to write extensions on Chrome and ChromeVox that leverage all of Chrome's extension APIs and then do a little bit extra with the ChromeVox APIs to produce some really nice user experiences. And then finally, Adu will talk to you on the work he's done on enabling some really, really useful features with respect to focus management and other HTML5 features. So I'll let each of the interns give you an overview of their talk. We'll have time for questions at the end. We'll have plenty of demos. Take it away. Serge.
Hi, so my name is Serge. I worked on redesigning ChromeVox, how ChromeVox navigation works internally. And actually, I'd like to start off with a story. So it was my final year in high school. We had just gotten our last programming assignment of the year. And it was really relaxed. There was not really any restrictions. We could do anything we wanted, provided that the teacher agreed. And so, most people did like tic-tac-toe or breakout or some game. I was a little weird, so I decided to do an expression parser. And so I went home to my dad that night, and at this point, he was the guy that taught me everything I knew about programming. And I was all excited, and I told him about this awesome expression parser I was going to build, and it was going to have parentheses, and you could do multiplication and exponentiation, and you'd have Boolean operators. And he looked at me and he said, well, that's kind of cool, maybe, but if you wanted to build something really awesome, you should build an interpreter. And I didn't know anything about interpreters or compilers, but it sounded kind of cool, so I agreed. And so I built an interpreter. I even had a UI for it. It had a text pane for input and a text pane for output, and a big green button to run. It was a dinky little made-up language that I made up. And so, I went and showed it to my dad, and he was like, "Well, this is kind of cool, But why do I have to declare all my functions in the global scope? Why can't I treat them the same way as variables and just pass them around the same way? Or why can't I declare them within other functions? And so I was a little ticked off. I had just spent all this time building this interpreter, and now he went and made some stupid request to get me to change it. But you know, I wanted to prove that I was still the best, and so I went and did it. But I knew in the back of my head that this would be a hard change to make, just because of the way that I structured my code previously. And so, you know, I cranked out some code. Any kind of code went. Didn't matter if it was hacks. You know, copy paste was my favorite weapon. And I got it finished. And so I went and showed it to him. And actually, I should have. Nope. There we go. All right. So I went and showed it to him. And, you know, expecting that he would be like really proud of me, that this was something awesome that I'd built. But he knew how to push my buttons. Like, I didn't even expect that he would ask me to make another change, because he already asked for this stupid change, and like, why would you need anything else? So I went to him and he said, you know, this is really cool. I like it. I told one of my coworkers at work that you're a really awesome programmer. And you know, at this point I could feel it, like I was winning, and I had a giant goofy grin on my face. And then he said, yeah, I told him you built an interpreter and a debugger. And I said, wait, what? I didn't build a debugger. And he said, oh crap. I told him that I would show it to him on Monday. And, you know, it was Friday night, and so I was fuming, like, how could you do this to me? But, you know, as angry as I was, it hit me at that moment. Clean code matters. I had a lot of hacks in my code, but at least some parts, like the UI, were isolated from the rest, and so they weren't part of that mess. With a debugger, I had to maintain the state of everything that was going on, and I couldn't just let my rinky-dink language run freely as it had before. I had to tie everything together, and it was really hard to do this because of like how messy it was. Sorry. Yeah, and so anyway, so I worked the entire weekend, and it took me a lot longer than the rest of the project combined. Like, I put in a lot more hours. I finally finished by Monday at lunch, just in time to email it to him so he could show his coworker. And when he came home that day, he told me that, you know, he was generally impressed with what I did. But I had already been infected. I considered it a failure because even though I got it into a working state, it was just impossible to make changes. And I knew that if he asked me to do anything else, I would not succeed. And so, you know, it's really frustrating when every bug you try to fix has a higher chance of introducing a new bug than of fixing the bug that you're originally trying to fix. So for a couple of months, I read a lot, and I tried to figure out this problem. Like, why weren't other people having this problem? And if they were, what were they doing about it? I couldn't understand how people could even build large projects in the face of deteriorating code. And so today I'm going to talk to you a little bit about some things I do to make or some things that I've learned from that I do to make my code suck less. Actually, you guys are really lucky. So at Google, you're in an organization where your manager's manager's manager understands that clean code counts. Most organizations in the world are not like this. It would take me a lot of effort to even convince you that this matters. So I'm just going to assume sort of that you believe me and jump into how to do it. So let's just quickly remember what refactoring is. Refactoring is modifying the internal state of a program without affecting any of the externally visible behaviors. So for my project, the second week that I got here, I found a bug in ChromeVox. And, you know, I dug into it. It took me a really long time. It was like 2 days. And I found an infinite loop, but it was really, really complicated. And I could tell that we had this massive file that in other places there could also potentially be infinite loops. But they were all like, they took a lot of effort to dig into. And at the same time, this was before a release, and we had like 20 bugs, all relating to this issue where Chrome would just hang, depending on some weird circumstances in which you would navigate. And so, you know, I did the math, and I figured that it would be a lot easier to just rewrite this component from scratch than to try to chase down all these bugs individually. And that's only if we're considering the cost of the bugs that we knew at the time, and not the future development that it would cost for that code, which is much higher than the current bugs. And so that's what I did. I refactored this navigation model. And as a result, we were able to add a lot of unit tests, testing some weird edge cases that we weren't testing before. And a lot of the tests that we were getting, a lot of the bugs that we were getting before are now gone. So I'm going to talk about 4 things. The first is I'm going to answer the question, when should you refactor? Then I'm going to talk about how to prevent changes while you're refactoring. You don't want your externally visible behavior to be modified. Then I'm going to talk about, I'm going to give some tips on good design practices. And I'm going to finish with some comments on the code review process. So when should you refactor? The approach that I take is to, every time I have a bug fix or a feature, I modify the code, I refactor the code first so that the change that I'm trying to make fits nicely in place, and then I make the change. So for a bug fix, I would first make it obvious that there's a bug, and then I would fix it. For a feature, I would manipulate the interfaces until my feature plays nicely with everything else that exists, and then implement the feature. And this is the approach suggested by Steve McConnell, who's the author of Code Complete 2. There's actually a more aggressive approach. So by this approach, I mean modifying the stuff that you change, refactoring the stuff that you change. There's a more aggressive approach where instead of touching just what you need to change, you refactor everything that you even need to understand. So all the code that you read, you would refactor on every commit. I personally think this is a bit too aggressive, but you can read more about it in Martin Fowler's book on refactoring. So sometimes though you can't refactor incrementally. Sometimes the code is like very complicated and hard to untangle, or the business changes are really hard to make. And in that case, it's easier to rewrite the entire component from scratch than to try to refactor it incrementally. It just costs less effort. And this kind of falls in line with the approach of not keeping your code clean as you go along, and instead trying to do it in large chunks every long once in a while. And this is like way more expensive per unit of code than the alternative, right? It's just the original developer is no longer there, and even if they are, nobody has the code fresh in their mind. And on top of that, code just tends to build up over time, and so there's a lot more interactions that you need to deal with in order to make that small change, or the small change that you would have had to make before. Okay, so once you've decided that you're going to refactor, how do you prevent stuff from changing? You don't want to break anything that already works. So there's 2 ways you can do this. The first is you can prove things rigorously about your programs, but that's really hard, and like it reduces productivity by a lot, and you usually don't need the type of error tolerance that gives. And the second way is, to sort of wave your hands and say, well, here's some examples that it works for, so let's just assume that it works for everything. And that's testing. And testing is awesome. It gives you 3 things. The first thing is that it'll alert you when there's a problem. So integration tests are really good at this. They have a really wide coverage area, and so if any of the components or any of the interactions between the components have a problem, you'll probably know about it. The second thing that tests give you is that when there's a problem, you know where to go to fix it. And integration tests are not good at this. Because they have such a wide coverage area, you don't know exactly where the error came from. You need something much closer to the component that's being tested. You need a unit test. And with ChromeVox in particular, we had a problem that a lot of our tests that were actually almost all of our tests that were testing navigation were also testing event handling. And event handling is asynchronous inherently. So every time we'd have a bug with navigation, we'd have all of these asynchronous things going on that we'd have to also keep track of. And that made it a lot harder than it needed to be. And so a lot of that is gone now. So the third thing that testing gives you, and this is a lot more subtle than the other 2, is that it's a forcing function to force developers to write clean interfaces. It's really hard to add unit tests for messy interfaces because you have to do a lot of setup and making sure the environment is correct every time you write a test. And so a good developer that's lazy will realize after adding the first or second test that it's not worth their time, and it's much easier to just redesign the interface. Okay, so now that you have your tests in place, you need a tool to actually be able to do the refactoring. And that tool is good design. And as an aside, I should mention that not everybody agrees with good design. So, for example, Alan Kay, he's the creator of Smalltalk, and he coined the term object-oriented programming. he thinks that objects should not have any strict protocols in how they interact. So he thinks instead they should be able to negotiate, the same way that, like, if two people didn't speak the same language, even though they can't communicate, they can still get things accomplished. But that's far beyond the scope of this talk, and I have some links at the end that I can point you to if you're interested in that sort of stuff. Anyway, so back to design. So the first tip I have, I'm just going to share 4 tips. The first tip I have is don't repeat yourself. Duplicate code, even when there's minor differences, is really a pain to maintain. Every time you modify one chunk, you need to go and modify all the other chunks that are the same. And developers just aren't good at this as humans. And so with ChromeVox, we had problems with all of the navigation that you could do on a page was symmetric in that you could do it both forwards and backwards. And a lot of that was duplicated. And so we'd have weird, actually, the mic is there. And so we'd have weird, like, consistency problems depending on whether the user was going up or down the page. And a lot of that has been fixed now too. The second tip I have is replace switch statements with polymorphism. If you see a switch statement that's testing on the same expression, that's a really good hint that you should probably turn that into polymorphism. With ChromeVox, we had this giant file that almost every function was testing on the same expression. And so moving that away into an isolated class removes a lot of the clutter and lets the class deal best with its data. So the third tip is break classes up along internal boundaries. If you see that one part of the class is being accessed independently of all the rest of the class all the time, you should probably break that up into a separate component. That prevents you from having large, giant classes that try to do everything. And my last tip is avoid circular dependencies. So it's weird that, like, I would have this tip, but we use the JavaScript closure compiler, and it's kind of bad at enforcing things just because JavaScript is dynamic. And so you can sort of cheat and get around restrictions like circular dependencies. And circular dependencies are bad for the same reason that globals are bad. They introduce a lot of things that you need to know about the entire program every time you're working within just one portion of it. And one way you could cheat is just by having your entire program in a single file, but then, like, obviously that's not a very good way to structure your program. So I only gave 4 tips. That's a very narrow view of what's out there, and there's a lot of really good books on this, which I'll list at the end. So I'd like to finish with some comments on the code review process. So refactoring makes your own code awesome, whereas code reviews are to make your team's code awesome. Walk with me through a thought experiment. Imagine if we tweaked the code reviews that we have slightly, in that you'd have code go in and comments go in as we do now, but you wouldn't have any of the names associated with any of the code or the comments. Think about the kind of comments that you'd get, and think about how the code would evolve. Developers wouldn't be afraid of, say, looking stupid because they don't understand something, right? And you'd get a lot more questions and even small clarifications that would just make the code better in general. You also wouldn't have the feeling of this person won't like me because I just asked them to redesign this and it's going to take them 2 hours. And so I really think that we should be more vigilant and really not shy away from asking questions and asking people to do more stuff if it's going to improve the code. And so to recap, refactor often, make sure you test so that you don't lose lose functionality. Practice good design and be vigilant in your code reviews. So that's all I have for today. But I do have some extra stuff. So that's a cute dog. And so some books that I recommend. I mentioned these in the talk. Code Complete 2. That's just an awesome book about maintaining code and just very good in general. I highly recommend it. Martin Fowler's Refactoring. Also very good. It's very much in the style of the design tips that I gave you, where they have very specific patterns that are obvious that you should change them in a certain way. If you haven't read Design Patterns by the Gang of Four, Highly recommend that, but it's very hard if you're just getting introduced to the topic. It's very dense, so you might get a little bit bored. So if you're looking for an introduction, Head-First Design Patterns is good for that. And some talks that I mentioned and some that I didn't. So Alan Kay on negotiation, that's very interesting. And one more is John Carmack at Quakecon 2011. He has about a 15-minute segment where he talks about his experience with development. And it's interesting that even though he's in a completely different sort of domain where his focus is hardcore performance so that video games can run more awesomely, he tends to converge to the same results. And that's it.
That's 4 questions for Serge.
Hi everyone. I'll just switch here. Oops. So hi everyone, I'm Chara. I'm an intern in Access Eng team. Today I'll be talking about accessible website development, leveraging the ChromeVox platform. So first, I'd like to imagine that you're a screen reader. And this is the CNN website from 2000, and as you can see, so you're gonna like try to read this to a blind user, and as you can see, there's like a lot of text and a lot of clutter, but there are like very few pictures and very few like rich content. So there's like some sort of challenge in like how to read this website efficiently to a blind user. So you don't want to, for example, keep repeating the sidebar. You want to directly go to the headline to improve efficiency. But let's go fast forward to 2012, and this is the CNN's website today. And as you can see, there's even more, there's even richer content. For a user that can see, it's really easy to understand. But from the perspective of a screen reader, obviously, it'll be much harder now. We got a lot of pictures and a lot of dynamic content here. And so as you can see, like as web pages get more complicated with like dynamic contents and new web technologies, it gets harder, it gets a bigger challenge to make accessible screen readers and make web pages more accessible. So like I've been working on ChromeVox, which is a screen reader, as Raman had talked about before, and like the two main challenges I have seen with how a screen reader should work for web pages, it needs to first describe a web page accurately yet concisely that a blind user can efficiently navigate through, and also it needs to have support for a good robust navigation system. And this, in a lot of cases, this requires a lot of development effort. There are like certain technologies such as ARIA, which screen readers can use to actually improve the intelligence, but most developers currently don't tend to use it on their web pages. And a lot of like all these web pages need significant reorganization of their information to actually be able to fit into a screen reader. So so as Raman had already talked about ChromeVox, I just want to like point out to a couple of the important features of ChromeVox which will be relevant to my talk. First of all, ChromeVox is also ARIA aware. It supports a lot of the state-of-art accessibility web technologies to read and describe each DOM element in a web page more intelligently. But the issue with ARIA is you actually have to, when you design the web page, you have to like add that as a tag. And like sometimes we don't want that. We may want some other developer to actually be able to write a script and make the page more accessible. And also, we also may want to explicitly tell the screen reader how to read a given DOM object and how to navigate through the page. And that's where the API exposed in ChromeVox come in handy. And so I'll just give a brief introduction about the API. This is a list of functions. The most important functionality of the API is you can change the cursor of the screen reader to any given element, and you can also change the description of each object. And so you can also read more about the ChromeVox API in the documentation of ChromeVox in ChromeVox homepage. But I just want to show like a quick cute demo of the API in action. So let's play the game. And let me enable ChromeVox here.
Google Accessible Jawbreaker. Google Accessible Jawbreaker 00 green.
So as you can see, I don't know if most of you will be familiar with this game. This is just a game which have a lot of colorful balls, and you want to try to pop the same color balls. I mean, I used to play this when I was really young on my mom's PDA. And so this is a game which was probably which was probably designed for seeing users. But with leveraging the ChromeVox API, you can actually make this accessible. So I'll just
10 orange, 11 green.
I can just navigate one by one. I can also do
row 1 orange, green, green, red, orange, blue, green, 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 orange.
I can read one row to have an idea of my surrounding circles, and I can also
score 0, 20 red balls, 23 blue balls, 32 green balls, 25 orange balls.
And let me play.
Selected pot 2 balls, 2, 3, 1, 4, 0. Selected pot 2 balls. New score 4. Now on 4-0 red. Loading.
So yeah, it's I guess a free fun game, but no need to waste too much time. Going back to demo.
Application HTML view of the blank. ChromeVox is now inactive.
Okay. The most important thing to note about this, game was the script that actually has the game logic can be decoupled from the script, which makes the game accessible. So this is more like if you have ChromeVox installed, this second script would be injected to the page, and this would make the game accessible. That's why we call these like ChromeVox extensions. So ChromeVox is an extension, and we're writing ChromeVox extensions. And I've been writing a bunch of these through my project, and so my first assignment was to write one for Google+, and I wrote it, and then my manager asked me to write one for books, and then Drive and Gmail, and I realized I've been just moving code off, just copying code and refactoring it a lot, and it's kind of boring, obviously. So I said, why don't I just write a library to speed this up? And then what I wrote as a library eventually became a framework, and this framework is something I've been working on for a while, and hopefully this will provide a more streamlined, easy, and simple way to actually write accessible websites for ChromeVox. And this will basically what you have to do is for each DOM element that you think are important for accessibility, you have to define a selector, which is either a class name, it's a DOM selector, and you also have to define how you want to read it. So in this one, you would also have a definition for author, content, and comment count. You would have different objects for that. This is what I call speakable objects. And then if when you run this extension, it would be reading something like Char said, "I love Google Tech Talks at 2 p.m. 1,000 comments." And so the really nice features of this framework is, first of all, it allows you to naturally read each DOM element, and you can actually you can have a nice overview for each DOM element that you want to read. And also, ChromeVox API supports this cool feature to categorize the types of speech. You can categorize each speech as user value, annotation, context, and regular text. This actually affects the intonation of ChromeVox, so you can actually stress certain text over other. Another cool feature is with virtually no further development effort, you can actually have a built-in navigation system. And keyboard users will find it familiar to use J and K to scroll through your page. And if you also already have like a navigation system implemented in your website, then that's great because my framework will play nicely with your navigation system. Also, together with ChromeVox's built-in navigation system, we end up with a really robust, accessible web page. So I've been like writing up these extensions, and these will actually, using the framework, these will be released as a standalone extension, Chrome extension to Chrome Web Store. So I got extension for Google+, Books, Calendar, News, Gmail, and Finance. And I want to show one of these. I'll show you I'll show one without the extensions is installed first, and then I'll show how much we can improve on this. Okay. So first, as you can see, okay. So let me disable this. Let me disable the extensions, and now I loaded Google Finance, and I'm going to try to navigate with regular ChromeVox keys here. Oh, I have to enable
Header.
So let's refresh.
Google Finance, stock market quotes, news, currency conversions, and more.
So Google Finance doesn't have its own navigation system, so we're stuck in regular ChromeVox navigation now. And let's see what happens when we try
Ordered
navigate.
list with 11 items, list item, plus ally, link.
So it actually tried to
List item,
focus
list
on the
item,
top,
image.
right? That's not what we want really, because we actually want the user to be able to directly access the content of the page, not like a top toolbar or
List
another
item, play, link.
Something which is irrelevant to the actual page. So I think like we can do better than this, and now I'm gonna like turn on the extension to see how much we can improve. Okay.
Google Finance, stock market quotes, news, currency conversions, and more.
So now I have also enabled the J and K support, like the keyboard navigation support in my framework, and this should actually work better.
Headline, U.S. regulators have Britain's Wild West bank culture in their sights. By The Guardian, 2 hours ago the Labour MP John Mann, an outspoken member of the Treasury Select Committee.
So as you can see, it actually, the cursor went above the DOM element. So why is that happening? Well, it's not a bug, it's a feature, because now we can actually use regular ChromeVox to navigate
The Guardian,
through the
hyphen, 2 hour, the Labour MP, Iran broadside,
So as you
brings
can see,
chart
like
holiday to a
using
halt.
regular
Link.
ChromeVox navigation in conjunction with my framework's navigation, we have a really accessible web page. Let's try reading a table.
Sector summary, 8 sectors have gone up on average, while 3 have gone down. The best sector has been cons. Cyclical changing plus 1.92%, while the worst performing sector is utilities changing minus 0.45%.
So for those of you who are like sitting in the back, I mean, it's actually, as you can see, like it's descriptive. It's describing the overall information of the table, and you can also go in the table.
Sector. Change, basic capital goods, link, plus 1.24%.
So you can also, if you want to actually go through the table, you can have more detailed navigation with regular ChromeVox navigation. So as you can see, like this framework has a lot of potential, and it's like 300 lines of code for the extension, which took me like 2 days, and I had other stuff to do. And I mean, it's really reducing developer effort, and like because Google's mission is like to make information universally accessible, and like we're helping developers to actually make their websites more accessible. So
application HTML. ChromeVox is now inactive.
So that's all I want to show you today. we will be releasing the framework soon, and we will also have a documentation for the framework shortly. Thank you very much for your attention. Thanks.
All right. Hi, everyone. My name is Adu. I'm a software engineering intern this summer at Google, working for accessibility. And here I'm going to talk about intelligent focus recovery for ChromeVox. All right. So first things first. Here's what we're dealing with today. So there's some. So like, as you saw before, like CNN, like 10 years ago even is a very different place. The web was a different place, and now we're dealing with much more advanced technologies. So nowadays, web developers are leveraging things like Ajax and WebSockets, and static web pages are a thing of the past. Like web apps nowadays are extremely interactive and fast. They load fast. They've pruned out inefficiencies with asynchronous stuff. All these things. This is all great for most users, but this does present a lot of accessibility challenges. Not all of these features port well over to, say, non-visioned users. For example, drag and drop, things that are really intuitive for visioned users. Yeah, these are difficult to do in any other way. So stemming off of that, developers make these really interactive apps, but they're not reliable. We can't hold them accountable for upholding accessibility standards. And this happens on your day-to-day websites and even some really, really big ones like Google+, which we'll go into later. And finally, this is the web that ChromeVox is swimming in. How do you deliver a high-quality screen reader in this environment? And so, these are all challenges that we're looking into. So my project is about focus. So what is page focus? Page focus it's where you are on the page. This is what ChromeVox is trying to read to you, what it's trying to represent to you. And for those of you who can see that, it is the orange active selection cursor. And I'm going to, a lot of the demo will be muted just so you can hear me talking. But there is an active indicator selection, and I will make it audible when I can. Okay, so let's get into what is Google Plus with no intelligent focus recovery. It's going to be a simple text. I'm going to open a dialog, close it, and we're going to be lost. So let's see that in action and make sure we have the right extensions. Yep. Okay. So this is Google Plus. I'm just going to tab across the top. We should have volume right now. And let's go. Why? Off? It is on. Oh, okay. We turned it off last time. Thank you. Is it Control Shift? No. Got it. Okay.
Header,
sorry, guys.
Extensions.
Okay.
Heading
So
1, developer
let's refresh
mode,
this page. This is
checkbox
Google
checked.
Plus.
Google Plus.
You can hear him talking.
Order
We're going to go across the top.
List item. News.
We're going to
Sumner
go to the
Vichai,
first post.
Said undefined. Shared. Larry Page. Said always good to...
All right, so we're on Larry Page's post. He's talking about NASA's Mars rover, right? This is all good, and like maybe I have something. Maybe I want to share this post. I think it's really exciting. So we're gonna tab into this post, go through it. We're gonna mute some of this so I can tell you. All right, so you'll notice like most of these things are pretty good. Google Plus does a good job in ordering their icons. The developers note they have accessibility in mind, but when we want to share this post, so we've opened a dialog. And here's what we've got.
Browse people. WhatsApp share button. Cancel.
All right.
Button.
I don't actually want to post anything. This is a demo, right? So I'm going to cancel. And so, all right, I cancel. And now what? So what I expect is to keep reading the stream. What happens is I end up at the top. So if you listen carefully.
List item, images, list item, maps.
So this is the top of the page. And Like you don't
ChromeVox
expect
is
to be
now
there.
inactive.
It's reading you menu items, right? And you expected the next post in the stream, and this is all really confusing. And for really, really rich web applications like Google+, you could be like figuratively miles away from where you were before, right? And that's frustrating, and that'll happen every single time you open this dialog and close it. And I think one important thing to say is that, so yeah, the developers do a pretty good job. Like when you open the dialog, they place your focus in the dialog, and that helps screen readers a lot. But when they close it, a lot of developers forget that they need to place that focus back, and they have that control, but when they forget, that's when you get lost, and that's the problem we're trying to fix here. So that's called dropped focus. All right, so let's get back to the demo presentation. All right, so here's the problem that we're dealing with. This is what we want to do about it, okay? Dropped user focus should be detected. So when the developer fails to assign your next, like the next thing to speak to the user, we want to be able to tell when that's happening. Next, we want to restore the user to the correct place. And I have correct italicized here because, I mean, what does that even mean? And so obviously when I implemented this, there were some design decisions to make, and we'll talk more about them later. But we have an answer, and I'm sure it could be improved. Thirdly, we want to return control of the navigation to the user immediately after we rescue them and put them in the correct place, because we don't want to just jerk them around in the page forever. That's bad. Like we want to make them feel like they're in control, because they should be. And finally, we never want to override developer focus assignments. And what this means is sometimes a developer is like controlling focus correctly. And when they are doing that, we don't want ChromeVox to replace that with the best guess. We can't override like the natively running scripts on the page. And so we have to be really careful around that. And a lot of times they are doing the right thing. So, yep, you want to be careful. So the general strategy we used to, I guess, attack this problem is the first thing I ran into was, well, detecting drop focus is actually pretty hard. It's because like a lot of times the developer will drop focus like momentarily in their script and then put it on something else. And that's not a mistake. We have to let that happen. And so like there's those cases. And in addition, like the browser doesn't yell at you and be like, hey, there's no active elements. You know, you should probably do something about it. There's like in the converse analog, there's like the browser will tell you when something has set focus set to it. Like there's a focus handler, right? So we don't have that like signal. So as an alternative, we came up with the concept of valid places. And a valid place is one that the developer intends the user to interact with. So a common like criteria for this is like making sure it's visible. Like if it's invisible, they probably don't want you to mess around with it, right? Your screen reader shouldn't be reading that content. Also, it has to be part of the page. Like so, criteria like that define a valid place. And so like the idea is, if your place is somehow not valid, you're probably lost. And I say probably because we're not sure. I mean, but if your node is invisible or it's like not attached to the document in any way, like our ChromeVox's best guess is that the user is lost or is about to be lost, and we will rescue them. And so that's what a valid place is. And in order to rescue the user, the idea of correct that we had, that I mentioned before, is to return them to a familiar place. And to do that, you need to record their progress through the page. And so we'll sort of remember where you are on the page, and then when you're lost, we'll return you there. That takes care of those last 2 points. Right, so yeah, so a general implementation overview of how this is done. We've created a new module called Navigation History. And Navigation History is responsible for maintaining a list of recent places you've been and making sure to make sure it's clean, make sure all of those places are valid, so that at any point in time, I can ask Navigation History if I'm lost, I can ask Navigation History at any point in time for a valid place I could be. Right? So be like, oh, we think the user is lost, ask Navigation History, and then we can go there. So the valid heuristic. I already mentioned some of the factors before that we use. Make sure wherever the user currently is, make sure it's visible. Make sure it's on the page. Other heuristics we considered using were like, is the current element that we're on, like, is that even inside the viewing port? Like, if it's positioned absolute, like -1000, -1000, you might not be able to see it. Web developers probably trying to hide it from you. We should think about things like that, right? So that's all a heuristic of whether or not the developer wants you to interact with an element. All right, and so the way we have all this play together is we chug along until something's wrong, which is the lazy way of checking whether or not your current position is valid. So we'll go, the user will be navigating normally, and they'll keep going. And then suddenly some script or event that they trigger will invalidate their current position. This isn't, in the example from before, this is when I close the Google Plus dialog. I've triggered the close event by hitting enter on the cancel button. And I don't know anything is wrong, and I don't check for anything being wrong until the user sends me a new navigation command. And when they do, I say, oh, you know, your focus was dropped, you're lost. And that's when you rescue. And so that's exactly when you revert the user to a familiar place. And so that's pretty much where we hooked into ChromeVox's existing navigation framework. So it just asks navigation history for a valid place to go, and we go there. Okay, so let's revisit Google Plus with intelligent focus recovery. So I'm going to disable this. All right, so this is the new ChromeVox. Is it still the old ChromeVox? Thank you, audience. I see what it did. Okay.
Error start ordered list with 11 items.
All right. So let's refresh. Lower the volume. All right. So
ordered list with 11 items.
We're back at the menu up here. This is Google Plus. And we're going to jump to Larry Page's post again.
Menu, Larry Page, August
right here.
2012,
You can hear it.
12:06 a.m. Sharing details always good.
All right, cool, Larry. This is still really cool. But now that we have the new ChromeVox, let's see what happens when we try and share this post.
+1. Share this post.
All right, we're going to share this post. It's going to open up this dialog.
Clickable. Edit text clickable.
Cool. We're going to go through the dialog.
Share. Cancel.
And it's a demo, so I'm not actually going to share the post. Sorry. So cancel, right? And I expect to be still in the stream. I don't want to end up at the top.
Exit and dialog. Share this post button.
So if you listen carefully, you exit the dialog, which is ChromeVox doing it. That's not new. ChromeVox already announced that. But what's awesome is that it takes you back to that button, to the share this post button. And you are still in the stream, and you can navigate normally right after this. It seamlessly fits into the user experience, and you're not lost. And I think that's really important, and I'm glad we improved that. So, all right, so how did we do? I think that demo did it, right? But
HTML view of the
let's quantify it and deactivate this. Okay.
ChromeVox is now inactive.
All right, so cool. So, all right, does this meet our goals? So the first one is we do not detect dropped focus. And at first it was like, all right, that was one of the original goals. But we soon realized that dropped focus is only a symptom of being lost. Being lost is more general. Being lost is, you know, is the next node that we're going to visit, is it going to be meaningful? And a lot of times when focused is dropped, it won't be. But there's some other scenarios too that we actually account for here. And it's because we're lazy about checking. So the more general problem is a user is lost when their current position is somehow invalidated by the developer. And when that happens, navigating normally from that position usually results in some undetermined behavior. And so as long as we can catch the user when they're navigating from there, we can solve a lot of those problems. So thirdly, we have the correct position to rescue them to as the familiar position. I mean, you can always ask the question, can we do better? Is there something like, you know, should it be like the next thing in the stream? Like, is that what they're trying to do? But I think we did come up with a pretty good answer. I think as long as the user can recognize where they are, that's a lot better than putting them miles away at the top of the page. And of course, we're always open to suggestions. Second to last, the user is in the driver's seat right after focus restoration. I think we hit that one on the head. Fits right into the framework, and they're in control. And finally, does not obstruct the developer's intentions in most cases. So there have been a couple breakages on those sites, and we're working on those. But for the most part, this is huge for user experience, I think. yeah, a lot of these apps that are even really complicated ones like Google Plus, like this is a working solution. All right. Finally, I'd like to talk about some areas of improvement. So I have heuristics up here. And yeah, so I mentioned that a lot, like the fact that you're navigating from a valid place is a heuristic. And like we measure it, sorry, with a heuristic. And I'm sure that can be improved. There's only 2 real criteria right now, and we're trying to like see what other kind of criteria would be good for it. Second, better audio feedback. So right now, when focus is dropped, right, we don't detect that, but we can detect when you're in an invalid place. And when we do rescue you, we currently have no auditory like ear con or anything that goes to tell the user that they've been rescued, which I think is useful information. I think that's definitely one thing that we could do. Cool, so that's intelligent focus management.